is Sam Nasser. This is the Cleveland C# VB.NET User Group. We meet here every fourth Thursday of every month and cover topics related to anything about .NET. Tonight's presenter is Dave Hoerster from Pennsylvania, and he's going to be talking about Azure Bot Services. If you go to the next slide, please. Just a couple announcements before we get started. First of all, I'd like to thank Tech Systems for sponsoring the venue. I'd also like to thank IMKnowledge for sponsoring the pizza and the drinks, as well as the raffle prizes, Post-Sharp for additional raffle prizes, and NIS Technologies for providing the hosting for the meetup site. And also, if needed, the Wi-Fi password is ROC3001. And restrooms, if needed, are straight down the hallway on the right-hand side. Also, please keep in mind that despite the auditorium-style seating, we'd like to keep it as much of a roundtable discussion as much as possible, so participation is highly encouraged. And last but not least, if you would please mute your cell phones. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
So thanks everyone for coming out. So Sam said, my name is David Hoerster. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So don't hold that against me. You guys have a much better baseball team. We'll leave it at that. And so I'm a technology strategist for Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft for almost 2.5 years. Prior to that, I did a lot of application development work, whether as a developer and architect, leading teams and kind of driving sort of roadmap products. I was an MVP for a number of years prior to joining Microsoft. So during those years, I ran the .NET User Group in Pittsburgh. I organized conferences in Pittsburgh. I think Sam, you've come to a few of ours. That was a good time. And so now that I'm with Microsoft, I don't get to speak nearly as much, but I like to take opportunities like this to kind of come out and skills a little sharp. So thanks for letting me come out and talk tonight. What I want to talk about is the Azure Bot Service and the Bot Framework. It's a topic that I find really interesting. I think because I think in general, from a developer technology perspective, we tend to like automation. So being able to kind of do things automatically and then things just sort of magic happens. This fascinates me. I know with the Azure Bot Service, what also really draws me to it, maybe some folks here are like this, is that it's fairly simple. And I like to think I'm a fairly simple person. So I like simple. I like easy, and then building on top of that. It's funny. I was just talking to a customer earlier today, and it had nothing to do with the bot stuff, but they were talking about how to build like a web portal, and we were talking about like row-level security and all this really deep, hardcore kind of stuff. He's like, "Am I overthinking this? Are we overcomplicating it?" I'm like, "Yeah. Let's keep it simple. Like just maybe just filter on a user ID, see if that gives you what you want, then start layering in the complexity. It'll come naturally." And that's what I really like about the bot service is that it's fairly straightforward right out of the box, and then you can add on, integrating with other systems or making really interesting kind of bot navigation through different dialogues. But out of the box, you can get something up and running, no joke, in like 5 minutes. And that's what kind of drew me to it. And as I talk to other customers that I deal with, when I kind of showed them some of this stuff, like, wow, this is amazing. Like we can actually do that. Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's pretty cheap, if not darn near free. And you really can. When some of this stuff was in the preview mode, it was 3 clicks and you basically had a bot. Now it's like 4 or 5. We added a little bit to it. But anyway, so what I wanted to do tonight was kind of talk about a couple different topics that I think when you come out tonight, you should be able to go to Azure. You should be able to create a bot really within 5, 10, 15 minutes. But then you can also kind of see, okay, I see how this works. I see how I can start building upon it. I can start maybe even thinking I could maybe use this kind of interesting stuff. I think it's useful stuff. And I think it's useful stuff that you can probably take more. So real quick before I go into this, has anyone done anything with the Azure Bot Service up to this point? Is anybody familiar with the bot framework or anything, or this is all brand new? All brand new. Yay, that's great. So now I can just make stuff up. No one will know until they go home. So what I wanted to talk about was, okay, why bots? Like, why would somebody be interested in building a bot? If you were here prior to me starting, I clobbered a bunch of the slides together. I'm not going to go through a bunch of them, just in case I need them. Because, you know, in Microsoft, we live in .NET PowerPoint in Excel, so I have the first slide. So I wanted to just kind of touch on why you would consider building a bot, and maybe what are some of the use cases for a bot, generally speaking in a business sense. And then after that, I wanted to kind of touch on two different areas that we can start building out some quick demos. So a knowledge bot and natural language. So a knowledge bot, and we'll go into the details here in a few minutes. But a knowledge bot is basically your FAQs, but natural language kind of takes that a step further and says, all right, I'm going to ask questions, or maybe I want to perform actions, and my bot will kind of pick out the different parts within my speech, use those as parameters, and then go do stuff. And then I want to talk about different channels. And so the really nice thing, we'll touch on this with the why bot stuff, is with channels, it's almost like, and I hate to say this, but like you write code once, but then other things can talk to it. It's almost like an adapter type of pattern. So you're writing your core bot logic, and then you're saying, okay, I want to expose this bot to Skype, or Teams, or Facebook Messenger, or just a web control that people can type in, or Cortana. And I can't share my screen, but I actually exposed one of my, registered one of my bots to Cortana, which I think is kind of neat. Don't tell anybody, I actually tested it in the car while I'm driving. It's so cool. So, and then lastly, if time permits, and we can crank through this really quick, just trying to figure out how can you better debug your bots with the bot emulator. So that just kind of simulates sort of the channel that's talking to the bot. And you can see the payloads going on there. So why bots? So I was, as you can tell, I spent a lot of time on these slides. So I was writing them last night, and my 14-year-old son was walking behind me as I was typing this. He kept saying, "My bots, my bots." He thought I was. He thought it was funny. He was annoying. And Will, if you're watching this, I love you a lot. So, but really, why bots? I'm gonna laugh every time I say that. So usually, when we start searching for stuff, usually we're kind of presented with some sort of search query form, right? You know, I got a bunch of text boxes, drop downs, date controls, all this kind of stuff. Some websites just overwhelm you with controls. Like, oh my gosh, like what do I pick? I should show you the. I don't have it up right now, but like the careers page within Microsoft, like the left-hand side is just drop down of stuff. It's like instead of that, I would really just like to type in or say, hey, I want to find a car. I want to pick it up in Pittsburgh on August 17th. I'm going to drop it off on the 25th, and I want it to be a full-size car. That's really all I want to do. Really, if you can read this, there's nowhere on here that I can say what kind of car that is. I looked at that from which site. So it's like I'm putting in some criteria within this form, but I'm not even specifying what kind of car I want. I'm probably thinking of another page that could do that. But with a bot, it's a little bit more freeform. It's more of an interactive type of experience. And so that, from a user perspective, if you're building applications, you kind of want that. You want to reduce the friction that the user has with using your application. And you want to give them the ability to interact with your site or with your application in ways that are comfortable for them. So some people, this particular way of interacting with an application, nothing against it, but this could really start sprawling out of control. And then every time you want to add a new criteria, that people can search on. Okay, now I gotta update my database, my business logic, and something else in the middle, and also gotta update the logic here in the front end. Instead of if they just type something in or if they say something, okay, I don't really have to design anything on the front end. Maybe I provide some example utterances. But then your middle layer in your database can then kind of take care of a lot of this. That's where the bot service really comes into play too, because that can kind of take care of a lot of that parsing logic and figuring out what the user is trying to do. So combining, a bot approach to building your applications in addition to using things like the Azure bot service and the cognitive services that go along with that really make things kind of easy to start getting something working quickly. So that's one reason. And I like this approach. Not for everything. It's obviously, you don't want to throw bots at every single thing. I think some people, I've seen that throughout my career. I've been developing applications longer than I care to think about, and I was a huge proponent 10 years ago, maybe a little less than that, of anyone familiar with CQRS as an architectural pattern. I really liked it, but I kind of refrained from using it for everything. But I've seen other people just CQRS the whole thing, and the app becomes like login pages being CQRS. Eventual consistency on trying to log in, probably not the best idea. So anyway, another great use case for bots is I really think the ability to interact with your customer on a 24/7, 365 kind of basis. So another site that I saw, it was more of like a retail, e-commerce kind of site. And I went to it, and I was up kind of early one day, and the website was your typical front page of the website. And up in the upper left-hand corner, it said, "Hey, chat with us." And I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. 6 in the morning, I hit chat with us, and the little chat box came up on the bottom right-hand side of the page. And the message that was presented to me was, "Hi, we're not here right now. Leave a message. Type your name, your email address, your phone number, and the description of what you want to talk about, and we'll get back to you." I thought, well, this is really no better than me calling somebody. I'm just curious about what products you have, or maybe I'm curious about the status of my order, or things along those lines. And what turned out to happen is that chat interface on that website was staffed by actual people behind the scenes that work from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. Monday through Friday. So if you hit that site on a weekend or early in the morning or late at night, you left a message. And so we actually talked to some people about that and talked to them about bots, and they're like, "Oh, that's a great idea." And so the solution is not, okay, the bots are going to do everything that human does, but maybe from a perspective of me, I'm curious about the status of my order, or I'm just curious about maybe specifications about a product that I can't find on the web page. Those are areas where bots can really help. Kind of that 80% use case, right? 80% that you can kind of automate, and then the 20% of the situations where, okay, I'm having a problem with my order, I need to talk to a human. Okay, in those situations, you can then escalate down and say, all right, you know what? We're going to take your information, we're going to put it in a queue, and somebody will get back to you as soon as they can. But at least in those situations, the user who's using the site, yeah, they might be a little bit upset, but at least they feel like they're making some progress. Like, okay, I got a little bit of information, but no one's there right now. They're going to get back to me. Instead of, I want to learn about the epicenter remote control. No one's there. No one. I don't need a human to tell me. I just need somebody to kind of show me a catalog page or maybe some internal specifications. And that's a great use case for bots. So there's a one slide in here that I do like. All right. Here we go. All right. So forget about the digital transformation stuff. But in terms of use cases and scenarios for bots, one of the big areas that we generally see bots really being useful and really being able to kind of prove some initial value is really in the field of customer service. So what I was talking about, the chat with us now. It's customer facing, like external facing, but also internal facing too. Internal IT help desk. The common question I always get is, 80% of my help desk is spent resetting people's passwords or telling them how to reset their passwords. Well, why not just maybe have a chat bot that says, hey, ask me a question. All right, how do I change my password? And then provide them information on how to change their password. And then if they're stuck or they can't, understand the directions, then you escalate to it. But those are great use cases, and you can really, let your help desk kind of work on the things that are really important instead of always answering the same questions. And then there's a bunch of other use cases that bots come into play, and these are changing all the time. I mean, I think this slide's probably a year old, but I still like it just because it reinforces, at least to me, that bots aren't the solution to everything. And I don't want people to come away thinking that I'm advocating. You got to automate everything. You got to botitize everything. That's not really the right way to go. You got to think about the use cases. You got to think about how people are going to interact with your application, and then really evaluate, does a bot make sense or not. So that's why bots. The really nice thing about I guess the Azure bot service is the way that you build your application or your bot logic, let's say, how you're going to interact, how you're going to respond to different types of questions or requests. And the bot service allows you the ability to kind of build that code, deploy it out, and run. But the bot service, what it really does is it takes that code that you built and then really allows you to connect it to a number of different channels. So I'm not writing specific code for Skype or Office or Cortana or something else. I'm kind of writing my code once, and then the bot service provides different connectors to a number of different communication platforms. Slack, Facebook Messenger, I think it's one, but I've never used it. But there's a bunch, and that's kind of the great thing about it. I think that's one of the big selling points online. I like this slide on because I think so many marketing people love my building. It's very intricate. I don't exactly know what it's supposed to be. I've seen this on so many different presentations. I'm like, that's really cool. Somebody wrote a robot. Anyway. So what is the Azure bot service? So really, it's Microsoft's intelligent bot platform. It does wrap, I would say, several cognitive services exposed as chatbots. So what we'll see today, I think the most will expose two. But you can, they're almost like Lego blocks, right? Maybe I want, well, maybe three. I want to be able to parse spoken text or typed text. I want to kind of determine what that user is trying to do, like what the intent might be. And maybe I also want to see, is the user really upset? What's their sentiment? Are they really angry? Are they happy? If they're angry, maybe that's now an indication to me that, okay, you got to escalate this to a manager. And you just kind of snap these in. You can use them, you don't have to use them. And it's kind of neat how you kind of plug and play with some of these services. And the nice thing is that you're not kind of switching contexts from cognitive service to cognitive service. They're kind of, it's almost like, if you're going over like functional programming, almost like a functional pipeline kind of approach. I do something, I pipe it to the next cognitive service. I do something to that, I pipe it to the next service. That's pretty nice. Obviously, serverless is one of the new hotness things, right? So everybody likes that. But really, it's taking advantage of the Azure App Service. That really is what the bot service is. It's the Azure App Service with some syntactic sugar around it, with a few additional capabilities baked into the Azure port. That's really what the bot service in Azure is, and we'll take a look at that. But really, it's an app service. So if you're familiar with app services, familiar with deploying web apps out in Azure, bot service, really not a lot new to learn there. So I just hang on. And because it's built on app services, it easily integrates in with your CI/CD pipeline. I have a bot around baseball stats that I'll show you a bit. And I have it in GitHub, and as I do a commit, and I'm going to push up into my GitHub repo. There's a hook over onto my app service that, hey, I updated, let's hook up the master. I've updated master, let's do the build and release, let's update my app service and the bots on that. So it's really nice. You don't have to do that, but that capability is there because, again, it's built on top of app services within Azure. So again, it's just like the whole Lego block approach to building your application. And cost. Yes, everyone wants to know about cost. So again, it runs on your Azure App Service, or runs on top of Azure App Service. So you can use an existing Azure App Service plan. You can do a consumption-based model if you want to, or you create a new Azure App Service plan. There's a couple of tiers to them, obviously, but really, it's not a tremendous amount of cost that you incur. And there's a number of free tiers that are available within bot services. You can really keep those costs down within a month. If you guys, do you have an MSN subscription at work? So most people probably do to some level. If you have $50 a month or $100 or $150, whatever your level happens to be, you can easily stay underneath that limit just by doing some really small bots. So you're not gonna. It's not like spending up on HCN Insight Cluster. Which I did that once, and I was actually coming back from MVP Summit. I was in a Panera waiting for my plane. I spun it up. I forgot to turn it off. I got on my plane. By the time I got home in Pittsburgh, I burned through my $150. And however many hours that was. So I was like, I got to wait a month to replenish the.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yes.
What does throughput mean?
What does what? I'm sorry.
The word in the lower right corner, throughput.
Oh. Yeah, good point. Thank you.
I don't know if that's a misspelling or maybe what's the matter is I don't know what it means.
So there's like a free tier and a paid tier for most of the bot services in the Azure bot service. The free tier limits you in terms of the number of messages that you can process, I think, per day. I'll take a look at that. It's something like that. The paid tiers obviously give you a higher number of messages that you can process per day. So I think the free tier, it might be per month. I think free tier is like 10,000 messages a month. I think, or maybe it's a day. I have to double check that. Don't quote me on that. And then the paid tier gives you more messages, and then there's overage also. So if you go over whatever you're allocated for whatever you're paying per month, then they're going to charge you per like 1,000 messages. So if you have a very active bot, you can consider a paid tier over.
Now, what do you mean messages? It's like a HTTP getter push every one of those.
Yep. It's an HTTP post.
Okay.
So, and that's, in my opinion, that's the beauty of the bot service. It is a RESTful service that you're invoking. So every time I ask a question, that message is posted up to the bot service that processes it and responds back with whatever that response happens to be. So that message then goes against your lot of messages in that time period. So,
would you happen to know offhand how does that compare to Heroku? How many free messages does Heroku allow? Would you happen to know?
I don't know.
That's okay then.
No, I haven't touched Heroku in like a number of years, way before I joined Microsoft. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I get it.
All right. Any other questions so far? All right. That's all I have for slides. Unless you want more slides. Who wants more slides? So I thought the first thing to take a look at is what's called a knowledge bot. So we'll come back to my Azure space for a second. So a knowledge bot within the Azure bot service is really kind of automating, let's say, frequently asked questions. So, for instance, let's say I work for the IRS, right? I like hunting out websites that have lots of FAQs. So the IRS site has a bunch of FAQs, right? And then they have pages of FAQs. And so when you're trying to find maybe an answer to a question, okay, I could search up here, but maybe it's going to take me, I don't know where it's going to take me. It may not take me to the actual answer, maybe it takes me to some other links. This takes me to the search results page. I wanted 2017 tax withholding tables, and they gave me Harvard's. It doesn't look right, right? So as a result, I'm going to start hunting and pecking through however many links to other FAQ pages and stuff like that. Wouldn't it be great if I could take all these and kind of dump them into almost a key value kind of store, right? A dictionary of sorts. And that's really what a knowledge bot is all about. Let's take a bunch of questions that a user may ask, or variations on questions that a user may ask, and then let's provide a related answer to those questions. So this service is called QAMaker. It's really simple. This is the one that takes 3, 4, 5 clicks to kind of set up, but at least shows you kind of the value that bots be able to bring. So what I did was I went ahead and I created a QAMaker knowledge base. So I call it a tax expert. And we'll go through the settings first. And I will say this, so QAMaker is a fairly new bot service that's available. It was in preview up until about, I'm going to say May or June timeframe. And then once it went GA, it changed a little bit. So I had a number of Q&A knowledge bases that were on the preview version, and they kind of, I need to migrate them over to the GA version. But really all it is, and the GA version of a QAMaker site takes your FAQs, your questions, your answers, and really dumps them into an Azure search index collection. So it uses Azure Search behind the scenes. So if you're familiar with Azure Search or Solar or Elasticsearch, that kind of stuff, that's the underlying search store for this. So the QAMaker site is really just kind of like a front API front end to Azure Search. So what I've done is I've created my Q&A site. I've added a handful of these IRS FAQ links to them as sources. And what we'll do here in a moment, actually I won't, because it'll take a few minutes. But let's kind of take a look at what that looks like. So right now I have 5 knowledge bases back there. Actually, who's that? So let's say electronic files. So here's a website, one of the FAQ headers. Chapter. So handful of sites here. So I'm going to take the URL for this. I'm going to add it in a QAMaker. So go back to my tax expert, go to my settings, and I'll say, okay, I have another FAQ site that I want to add in. Here it is. And we'll save and train. So what's going to happen is that it's very much like early 2000s kind of thing. It's going to screen scrape, right? It's going to look at that URL that is added in. It's going to say, hey, this looks like Q&A kind of format. I'm going to pull the questions and the answers. I'm going to dump them into Azure Search for you. So let me take some here.
Is it customizable at all? So, say it had a little trouble scraping it. Are you able to tweak the scraping logic?
Yeah, I'll show you the creation page here in a moment. I just wanted to. I thought this would be quicker. Okay. And so it brought that other site in, and then what I can do is I can go through my knowledge base itself. So this is really kind of like a UI into Azure Search. And I can see the questions that have pulled out and the answers that have pulled out. And I can go through, and I didn't touch this at all, so this is pulling whatever I can pull from the web page, dumping it into Azure Search. I can then can go through these and edit them, clean them up, make them simpler. I can add, for instance, on this one, alternative questions. So maybe there's more than one way to ask the same question. I don't want people to have to ask the question the way the FAQ is asked. I can add alternates to that. And then I can just manually add QAMaker. So maybe there's questions and answers out there that maybe didn't get pulled in, or maybe that link that I provided wasn't in the right format that QAMaker was looking for. Well, I can add them in manually. I can also pull in I think CSV files and PDFs also. So there's a couple different ways that you can add your data. So you can either point to a website, you can say here's a PDF, here's a CSV, or you do it manually and just start cranking stuff in into your knowledge base. So it's pretty easy to kind of get things up and running. So I'm going a little bit backwards. Okay. So once I've added those in, I got to save and train. So because this is really machine learning underneath the hood, I'm always training my database. As I add new information to my knowledge base, I constantly have to train it so it recreates that model that when I ask questions, it's going against the trained model to actually extract right answers. Has anyone ever used like ML Studio or Azure machine learning online? No? Okay. Really what you do is you end up creating the same kind of thing. You have lots of data, you kind of apply factors to that data, it ends up creating a model that you query against. That's what QAMaker is doing behind the scenes in terms of figuring out how do I relate certain questions to certain answers. So I've kind of added this in, but let's kind of start over. And how do I go ahead and create this knowledge base? So, and I will say for QAMaker, it's a little backwards. And I'm hoping that we kind of fix this maybe after Ignite, if there's nothing. So if I want to create a QAMaker bot, let's say, I would think I would go to QAMaker.ai and click on, once I sign in with my Microsoft ID or your personal account, create knowledge base. So I'll get to create knowledge base page. And the first thing that it prompts you to do is to create a Q&A service in Azure. So what this Q&A service in Azure is going to do is basically create your search, your Azure search instance, your resource for that, and then kind of apply the cognitive service resource to that search service in Azure. So you have to do this step first. There's a link, you can click the button, it'll take you to your Azure portal. So as I'm saying, it's a little bit backwards. But I can say, all right, I want to create this resource. So I'm in my Azure portal. I'm going to say, I want to create QAMaker. So I type in QAMaker comes up. I guess I'm going to create that. And like most things in Azure, I'm presented with a handful of questions that I fill out. Right? So the interesting bits here, obviously the name is just a friendly name for what your knowledge base is going to be. What subscription are you tying this to? The management pricing tier, so this is what your app service pricing tier. So you have two options here. So free and this S0 app service plan. So they're both going to be able to handle 3 calls per second. The free tier, the F0, obviously is the free tier. So it's a much more of a pooled app service environment, whereas the S0 is a little bit more, it's not isolated, but it's not as so you have to make that choice. What resource group you're going to put it in, and then your search pricing tier. So based on the region I had selected, the free tier for search is not available. I think it's depending on the region. But there's a number of different search tiers that you can choose from. So depending on the size of your knowledge base, how much throughput you're going to want, what kind of performance you want to have, you'll choose the search, the Azure search tier that you want to work with. So, here we go. And then lastly, what's the name of the app? So it's actually going to create an app service for this Q&A service. So give it a name, what region does your website going to be located in, and then whether or not you want admin sites or not. Once you've done that, you create your Q&A service, you can then go back to QAMaker. Okay. So that is the first step. So if you're familiar with the preview version of QAMaker, this wasn't part of that first step. It just sort of created it behind the scenes. With the GA version, you have to create your service first in Azure. And then you're going to link your knowledge base at this point. So I'm going to say, okay, what's my Azure Active Directory? Well, what subscription am I tying this to? I have to wait one. And then what's the Q&A service? This is the Q&A service we just created. So you could potentially have multiple Q&A services within your Azure environment. But you'll pick the one that you just created. And then the next steps are pretty simple. Name your knowledge base. So I call mine tax expert. And then populate your knowledge base. That's where you're going to pull in, whether it's the URLs to the FAQ pages that you want to pull in. If there are files that you want to upload. So the supported formats are up here. So CSV, PDF, Doc, DocX, and Excel. So you can have them in a number of different formats. So you can upload them here. And then the last step is create your knowledge base. So what it's going to do is once I hit create knowledge base, it's going to go out to the Azure portal, and it'll link in a Q&A service you just created. It's going to hit all these URLs that you entered them in. Screen scrape, dump them in the knowledge base. Go through the files that you've uploaded, scrape them up, put them in the knowledge base, and then you're off and running. One thing also to keep in mind, if you select the free tier for your Azure, for your Q&A service, you're only allowed 3 sources. So you're only allowed 3 URLs, and I think only 3 files. So keep that in mind. If you have a very small knowledge base, you can go with the free. If you don't, you have to go for the S0 version. I think it's $10 a month. So again, it's not huge amounts of money, but just keep that in mind. There's a limitation in terms of the number of sources that you can populate. So once you've done that, you now have a knowledge base. Let me take it back here. So you can see that dashboard data was pulled in from all the screening. So again, at this point now, you are able to kind of go through, see what data was pulled in from the QAMaker service, clean things up, maybe shorten things up, expand upon different items, add new Q&A pairs, delete items if you want to. Maybe there's some junk that got added in too. So you have a lot of freedom in here. It's pretty easy to kind of go through and start modifying stuff. Yeah. The neat thing is that this is primarily, I think it supports Markdown. So like double asterisk, single asterisk, that kind of stuff. You can have links within your knowledge base, link that's presented by your actual bot. You can actually have like links and italics and bold and all that stuff. So it's not just plain Markdown. So any questions on that so far? Makes sense? Pretty easy, pretty straightforward. So the next thing you want to start doing is kind of testing your bot, right? You want to start testing your knowledge base. So I want to be able to test this. So up here is a nice little service that allows me just to start asking my service some questions. So how can I change address? Right? And so I can see, well, how accurate is this in terms of pulling back data? So yeah, this is the answer that I was kind of looking to get. And you can kind of see how it's nicely formatted. And you can inspect what actually came back. So I can take a look at, here's the question that was brought in, here's the answer that it thinks is the most appropriate, and you can kind of scroll down and you see, okay, it's 71, 72% confident this is the answer that you're looking for. It also provides you some other answers that it thinks, it's not as confident on these other ones, but maybe this is really what you were asking. And so you can actually go through and you can say, well, actually, this is the answer I wanted. So I can tell, I can start training the Q&A service that, no, it's not that first answer you gave me. Really what I'm looking for is this third one. And so you mark that change, and then you're basically now retraining the model over and over again. So you're taking all this data, and you're not just forgetting about it. You kind of have to massage it, train it, make sure your model's pretty tight, and maybe even add some additional ways that people can ask that same question. So you start really building out a pretty robust knowledge base. So people can ask, they're asking, one primary type of question, but maybe in many different ways. Because nobody really asks the same question the same way. And so you can really make your model pretty dynamic in that sense. I don't want to save it. So anyway, hopefully you kind of get the sense of what happens as you're doing it. So as you start maybe changing or telling the Q&A service, no, it wasn't this first answer, it was the third one. Once you've made those changes, then you say, okay, let's retrain the model. It's almost like rinse and repeat. Let's retrain the model. Let's ask those questions again. Yes, the answers I'm expecting that would come up are coming up. Awesome. That's exactly what I wanted to have happen. So in that situation, once I'm done, kind of once I've saved and retrained the process a few times. And obviously, if you're going to be rolling this out to other people, you probably want to retrain it multiple times because you want to keep testing different ways people are going to use it. Once you've done that, then you want to basically start publishing your app or publishing your knowledge base. So once I've done that, I can say, okay, go ahead. I'm going to publish this out to my Q&A bot service that I created already. And so that's what happens. I go ahead and hit publish, and now my knowledge base is basically available for people to start querying. So once I've done that, you will be presented with deployment details down here. We'll come back to this in a moment. But keep this in mind. This is actually important information that you don't want to lose. And you can always come back to the settings for your knowledge base to get this. But we're going to need this in order to hook this up to the actual Azure bot service. So again, it seems like there's a few different steps involved, but once you do this once or twice, it's actually not so bad. So we've kind of gone through and we've created kind of the knowledge base, but now we need to create the web app bot on top of it that your users will be interacting with, that they'll be chatting with. So what we have to do is we have to create that now. So I go back to my resource groups. Oh, sorry. I'm going to create this resource. So whereas before I was just creating a knowledge base and I said I want to create a Q&A service or QAMaker, I now just want to create a web app bot. So web app bot, I'll select that. So again, let's create that. And again, I'll be presented with a few choices, with different choices. So again, I'm creating another app service. So really, with a QAMaker, there's two app services involved. So again, I'm actually naming my bot now. So this one, I think I call it app bot. Again, it's resource locations and what region I'm going to put the stuff in. What tier do I want my actual web app bot to run under? Is it S1 or F1, that kind of stuff. But the key piece here is I can select a template for my web app bot. And this is kind of nice. So what this allows me to do, and I don't have to do this. I can actually just create a plain old app service and deploy it, use the bot framework, and kind of roll my own by hand. But this gives me a pretty nice start in terms of building my web app. So there's 5 templates that are available right now, either in C# or Node. The version of the SDK for the bot framework is the current release is version 3. Version 4 is still in preview, probably going to be released in a couple months. Ignite's right around the corner. Maybe that's a recent announcement there. I don't know. But keep an eye on that. This will support .NET Core, whereas version 3 does not support .NET Core fully yet. So if you're a .NET Core fan, you're going to have to wait for full support in version 4. So since we already created the QAMaker service, let's create a QAMaker or a question and answer bot template. So I would go ahead and select that. I'll show you what that looks like. So I filled in all this information, just like a cookie show. I already have the pre-baked result in the oven. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We have to be done by 8.
8:30.
Oh, geez, okay. 8 or 1. We serve. So once you've created everything, this will be what your resource group more or less looks like. All right, so I've created my app service plan. Here's my Q&A cognitive service that I created in the first step. And now here's my web app bot that I just created in this last step. So if I select this, the properties on the left-hand side give me a lot of, it's almost like a condensed version of the overall app service settings that are available to me. And I can go to the full app service settings if I need to. But these are also kind of geared towards your bot. And so the two I want to call out right now are build and test. So once I've created that, I need to hook this web app bot to my Q&A service that I created earlier. So there are a couple pieces of information that are very key here. Microsoft App ID and Microsoft App Password are automatically generated here, but we're going to need these 3 pieces of information here. It's Q&A auth key, endpoint name, and knowledge base ID. So once you've created your QAMaker site or service, it kind of said, pay attention to the plugin details down here. This is the part that's a little hokey. Your subscription is this guy right in the middle of your post URL. So you're going to need this GUID, copy that, and you're putting that, your knowledge base ID is going here. So that's what I just highlighted, is your knowledge base ID. Your auth key is your endpoint key right here. And then the last piece of information you need is your host name. And you get that from here. Okay? So these 3 pieces of information, your knowledge base ID, your auth key endpoint, and your host name, you're going to have to take those, copy them into your app settings for your web app bot. Once you do that, your web app and your Q&A knowledge base are now both up. So if that is all successful, you should be able to go into the portal and basically say, I'll do change my address. And it should come back and present you a whole bunch of information that we saw through the QAMaker. So what this is actually doing, so this is kind of like an embedded iframe chat client that's now calling out to the web app bot that we just created, that then calls to the QAMaker knowledge base or QAMaker service, that then calls into Azure Search to get this information back up. So, and we didn't have to really, again, I don't like saying this, but we didn't have to write code yet, but you can. But just out of the box, we now have kind of a working Q&A site. You can take a look at code if you want. So if you go on the build property and click on online code editor, online code editor for your app services will pop up with this button. It's that log 3 in my there's 2 key files in here. There's lots of files in here. Lots of these you really don't need to worry about. You do want to care about build and deploy, because you can actually build and deploy your application from here. But your controller that's automatically created and the QAMaker dialog that's created, and these are actually being created because of that template that we selected. The message controller is just a plain old API controller. But what this guy does is he's calling out to root dialog here. So this is actually receiving the request, that I typed into the web chat client. It's essentially parsing it and then handing it off to my dialog, which is From a bot perspective, dialogues are the conversations that are happening. Almost think of it as like a frame the frame stage of conversation. So the API controller handles that, hands it off to the dialogue, and then your dialogue then says, all right, I've received this message here. This message received is what am I going to do with it? Well, okay, so it pulls out my auth key, my knowledge base ID, and my endpoint, which we just set in the app settings a few minutes ago. It's going to pull all that stuff out. So it's going to basically start composing a request out to your knowledge base. And then it's going to essentially hand that off. It's going to forward this off to my QAMaker service dialog. So the root dialog collects a bunch of information, creates the request, and then my basic QAMaker dialog, which is essentially a forwarded stage of the conversation, receives that, and it's already kind of baked into the class itself, calls out the QA services, responds back, and it goes back up the chain, back down to the client. So that's kind of how the flow works. So if you want to start playing around with code, you can kind of intercept and hijack the call in a number of different stages if you want to maybe perhaps do some additional logic, call out to some other service, maybe modify the request along the way. Maybe you want to inject in some additional information. You can do all that because you have total access to the code. Once you modify the code, you can just deploy it again, you'll rebuild it, redeploy it out to your app service, blammo, you're ready to go. You can go really crazy, pull it down locally, create your GitHub repo or your VSTS repo, do your local development, push it up, and then have your CI/CD pipeline pipe it over to your app service. So you kind of have this full cycle development experience with your bot also. So I want to show. So any questions on this? I know I went through a lot of stuff pretty quick. But hopefully this makes sense. Any questions so far? Very quiet.
So if you were to create a site from scratch on your local server,
yeah.
I mean, obviously you can cut and paste this code and use it there, correct?
Exactly. So there's nothing about this. This is panel.net, and it's a web API project. So you can go through, you can take this whole thing. You can download all the code as a zip file to your local environment, play around with it, modify it, get the heck out of it.
How much modification do you need if once you download that zip to run it locally on your machine?
The only thing that I've ever had to change, to be honest with you, this line right here. By default, it's looking for state management and Azure table storage.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have this set in your app settings, it's going to blow up when it tries to start up. Comment it out. Go with the in-memory data store.
Gotcha. Very cool.
It's pretty nice. I have to admit, it's pretty nice.
Yeah, it is.
So that's QAMaker. So this is a pretty simple bot, but it at least gives you a flavor of how you interact with bot framework and how Azure bot services work. So this one's probably, well, an echo bot would probably be the simplest thing, right? I ask it a question, you can save information back. But this one's actually doing something. So this one, you can actually see real results. You can actually kind of be like, hey, I'm doing something here. So I like examples like this rather than this.
The training side of it, earlier you showed, you typed in a question, it showed you the first result, and then you were able to look at other, kind of go down through that and select, say that, yeah, this one isn't the one I was really looking for, the second or the third one.
Yeah.
Is there any type of like automated training or learning over the time? So say it presents an answer to a user, the user says, this didn't really help me, could you show me more?
Yeah.
And then eventually say, yeah, that fourth one was right, and then it rank that one a little bit higher for the future.
So I'm trying to, it's a great question. So the question in essence was, in this training environment here, I'm presented with a UI that lets me maybe select the answer that wasn't suggested as the top answer. Is there a way to kind of automate that through the bot service, or are there other ways to do that, or can you only do it through the QAMaker service? I have to admit, I don't know. It's a great question. I've never been asked that yet. But what you are presented with, I'm going to jump around a little bit. If I go to the bot emulator, and give me one second to try this. What I want to be able to show you is if you of course, it's worth the Panera. So anyway, with the emulator, and even if you kind of rolled your own calls to the app pod itself, what I was hoping would happen here is that you would see a successful post come back, and then the JSON that would be displayed up here would essentially give you the same information that you saw in the QAMaker test environment. So you could take those results on your client and then say, okay, here's your answer. And you could maybe present the user with an option like, hey, this didn't really answer my question. And you already have that payload of, here's some other possible answers that the Q&A service found. And you can then present them and say, well, one of these maybe answer your question better. And then you can take that. I think there is an API where you can do suggestions. I'm not familiar with that. I have to look into that a little bit more. But that might be one way to kind of do that. That's just off the top of my head. But you do have access to the discovered answers and sort of a kind of ranked confidence score with each one of those. So that might be a start.
So at a minimum, you could track, since you have control over that, you could track that yourself.
Exactly.
And go back and retrain it.
Yep. Yeah. So that's one option there. There really is a lot of information that the confidence service is generating. You don't really see it through some of the training UI and stuff like that, but if you start looking at the JSON payloads that are coming back, there's a ton of information in there that you have access to in your client applications, so you can go crazy. That's a great question, though. I've never been. That's a good one. I'll go back and do that one. Thanks. Okay, so any other questions on QAMaker? Good. So I want to jump into the language understanding really quick. It looks like my emulator's not working, so that's my knowledge. That's okay because I'm already a little. Okay, so we did, we created a knowledge base. So it's really where I'm asking my bot questions and the bot's giving me back answers. It's pretty much a read-only type of experience. Obviously, we probably want to have a more robust experience with bots over time. Maybe I want to be able to ask it questions, and they're kind of parameterized questions. Or maybe I want the bot to take action to do something like book a flight or buy a product or something. I want to be able to have the bot not only just understand the question, but then pull out parts of my my message to it, and then maybe take action based on what I'm trying to do. And that's really where I think Lewis or language understanding really comes into play. This is a pretty slick cognitive service, and I will say it's more complex than QAMaker. So whereas QAMaker, you can probably get a knowledge base up and running 5, 10, 15 minutes. It's kind of rough, but at least you get a really good idea of what's going on. Lewis takes a little bit more time, only because you're doing more and there's more training involved. So what I generally like to do when I create my Lewis apps is I kind of do the opposite of what we did with QAMaker. So hopefully this doesn't confuse anybody. But I tend to create my Lewis app first in Azure. It will automatically create my Lewis application within the Lewis portal, and then I go into the Lewis portal and create my what are called intents and entities like that. But again, the process is still the same. So I'm going to go through. I'm going to create a web app bot, right? But I haven't created anything yet. I haven't created a Q&A service. I haven't created anything else. So I'm just starting with web app bot. So from here, I am going to select a different template. I'm going to select the language understanding template. The rest of the information is the same as what we did for QAMaker, so there's really no reason to go through that. But that's really the only change we're making here. I'm creating a separate web app bot. It's going to be a language understanding bot. And so it's going to use the Lewis template to create my web application, whereas before I used the QAMaker template to create the web application. They're not that much different, but the nice thing too is that the Azure bot service will go ahead and create my Lewis cognitive service behind the scenes too for me. So once I've created the Lewis web app bot in Azure, when I go back to the Lewis portal, which is this www.lewis.ai, I will see my baseball bot here. So I ignore this guy. So I have my baseball bot here. So if I go into that, when I first create it, this will be empty. I won't have any intents. And when an intent, I'm sorry, there will be intent. There will be a cancel, a greeting, a help, and a none. And really, those are just kind of basic out-of-the-box intent. What an intent is kind of what it means, right? It's what is the user intending to do with this service. So you can kind of say, okay, I want to cancel whatever action I'm going to be doing. I just want to have a greeting like hi or hello, whatever that might be. I need help. So maybe I don't understand what I'm doing. I just kind of say help, or help about player stats or something. And then none is sort of a catch-all intent where nothing else really applies. So I think this almost is sort of like the default in a case switch. And I've created 2 additional intents in here. I'm still kind of building them out, so they're not fully fleshed out, but I have player stat and leader stat. And so what I want my baseball bot here to do is to say, I'm going to be able to ask it 2 types of questions right now. One is, how many home runs did Barry Bonds hit in 1999? Right? So that's one type of question I may want to ask. And then the other question I want to ask is, who had the most hits in 2003? Okay. So I want kind of like who are the leaders for a particular year, a particular category, and then I want specific player data about a particular stat. That's kind of how I've structured my intents right now. So my player stat, I've been spending a little bit more time with, so I have some more what are considered utterances in this intent. And an utterance, again, is kind of what it sounds like. It's how people will invoke that intent. What's that language sound like, or not sound like? What words am I using to invoke that intent? So you can see I almost have like different variations on the same question, just different parts of the question are in different positions. There's other variations on words. So how many stat, we'll get to what this is here in a moment, but stat is an entity. How many home runs did Barry Bonds hit in 2003? And then you kind of see like what's going to fill in the blanks along the way. So just by looking at the utterances and the entity placeholders that I have in place, you kind of get a sense of how you start creating your language understanding application. I basically say, all right, I want to be able to pull player stat information, and I'm going to say, and I provided examples of how people will ask the question. So when I first create this intent, there's no utterances. By default, you probably want to hand it 5 or 10 sample utterances in order to start getting a good sample size so that the model can be very reliable. So I can say something along the lines of, how, this is terrible, how much did Barry Bonds get paid in? So this one's not a great one, but as I add them in, notice kind of what happened here. So I'm actually going to delete this. This is totally not the intent of this intent. But what it did was it took the utterance that I entered in here, it analyzed it, and said, well, all right, I saw Barry Bonds, and based on what I've seen in the past, Barry Bonds looks like a player, so I'm going to suggest that that's an entity called player. So I'll substitute that in there. And then get paid in 2003 or whatever I wrote. Well, okay, I've seen 1999 before. That's got to be a year, so I'm just going to automatically assume that's the year entity. So before anyone asks, I've already created a handful of entities, 3 of them, player, stat, and year. And there's only a couple different types that you can create. Creating entity is pretty simple. So maybe I'll say salary is one, and it's a simple entity type, right? It's a number, text, date. Those are fairly simple entity types. There's a couple of other types. Hierarchical, not 100% sure what those are always. There's many different types of entities, and they always kind of confuse me a little bit. Composite, think of that as first name, last name types one together, right? List, I find lists very, very useful, especially when I start dealing with baseball stats, because there are a number of different ways to call a home run a home run. So think of a list as almost like synonyms. And then obviously everybody's favorite, regex. You know, it's a joke, right? For solving problems with regex, you have to. And then you can just do sort of like placeholder, modifier, pattern. So that's how you would create a new entity. And then once I've created some entities, I can go back to my utterances and start kind of going through them. And the UI is a little shifty, right? But I start clicking on different words, and I say, well, I want to associate how with a particular entity, right? So maybe I start assigning words within my utterances, or placeholders within my utterances, to specific entities. That's how I start building out my parameterized utterances. So you can see why this takes a little bit more time than QAMaker. QAMaker is like, I'm going to screen scrape a whole bunch of stuff, dump it in Azure Search, and we're going to go ahead and just ask questions. This one takes a little more thought, a little bit more planning, and a little more understanding of how the user is going to use the system. So you probably can't get something up and running in 5 or 10 minutes. Maybe it takes like half hour, 45 minutes. But still, it's pretty efficient because it's giving you a really nice interface to start creating these utterances and your entities pretty quickly. You can start getting things working. Not too bad. Not too bad. So I'm going to delete this guy. But again, once I kind of created my utterances and my entities, and I've started associating them. Question?
Yeah, multilingual support. Is that there, or did you handle different languages?
I think right now, you have to double check on that. I think it's all one primary language.
Okay.
I think it's all languages. I have to double check that. Right? That's a good question. Any other questions? Everybody good still? Haven't lost anybody yet? So once I've created my entities and my intents and my utterances and associated different parameters within my utterances and entities, I now want to start training my model. So, or I'm sorry, I want to start testing the model. So what we can start doing is typing in test utterances. How a user might actually work with this. So how many homers did Frank Thomas? You can tell when I like baseball. So I can submit that off to the Lewis service behind the scenes, and you can see that if you make this out, the confidence level of this player stat is 88% confident that it falls in the player stat intent. If I click on this, I can get some additional information about what it's finding. This might help, I think, your question in the back, like, what other types of information is it pulling back? So you can see here are the entities that it's pulling out. So you can see that it's actually pulling out homers. So it knew that homers was an actual stat player. It actually was pulling out Frank and Thomas. And then the year it's just pulling out 1994. The other nice thing is that it's also giving me a sentiment analysis too. So this is another cognitive service that's kind of hooked right in, but it can tell that this is 81% positive. So I'm not saying that Frank Thomas is a bum. Actually, if I did something like that, how many numbers did that Frank Thomas hit in 1994? The sentiment analysis for that is very negative, 13%. So obviously, you can tell that me saying Frank Thomas is a bum, which is not. I actually never met the guy. But obviously, that one is much more negative. So that's also information you have available. So you can start sensing or detecting, if people starting to get a little frustrated, they get a little annoyed, do I need to escalate this too? So lots of different information that's available. And then I can also pull out the whole JSON view of what's going on. So I know this is kind of small, but this is easy to play around with, easy to get started. But you can see all the different intents that the Lewis service identified, and it's kind of ranking them for you over here. So obviously, clear status is the highest one that comes. God bless you. And then it's showing you the entities. And this is really helpful because it's showing you how the entities are structured from a JSON format. So if you have to start parsing out JSON and doing stuff with it, you kind of see, you get a sense of, all right, I need to pull out HRS for Homer's. So I kind of know where it's located within the overall JSON structure. And then obviously the sentiment analysis is also tacked on. So this is a ton of information, really, really great stuff. So you start just testing your model over and over again, and you can really start building out some really nice models. Once you've have done that, then you're constantly in this test and train kind of cycle, right? I add more utterances, I provide more examples, I test it, I retrain, and I kind of keep going over and over again, right? So once I've felt pretty confident about how this is kind of set up with my different entities or my different attempts, then I can go ahead, just like I did with QA, and then I can publish my model. So once I publish the model, the web app bot that I created can now invoke the Lewis service, and now I can start creating my chat application. I will say this URL sitting down here, every time I come to this page, it never saves the time zone. So it always goes back to Western Europe. So I'm assuming somebody in Western Europe. But you can also like enable sentiment analysis on your Lewis service. You can enable speech priming, which I've never really used. I've always been kind of curious about the idea, but I haven't really. So that's Lewis. That's how we now polish out my Lewis service. So once I've done that, what can I do with my Lewis bot? So go back to my already baked soup here. So I went ahead and I created that web app bot, and this is what ends up getting created. So it's a fewer number of resources that's being created because there's no Azure search service behind the scenes with this. This is purely just a cognitive service that's being created. So my baseball bot is my web app bot. Then I'll be doing a little bit of testing. So when I click on this guy, again, the difference between QAMaker and Lewis, there aren't any IDs and endpoints, all that kind of stuff that I need to set up, that I need to copy from QAMaker over here. Like this has already been taken care of. It's already hooked up to the Lewis service. We're good to go. So that's already set. So I can already start testing this in my web chat client. So I can say how many home runs. Let's say dingers. Bid on 2002. So Barry Bonds hit 46 home runs in 2002. So the really neat thing is that I called them dingers, but Lewis interpreted dingers as home runs, and I'll show you the code in a moment, but it then was able to switch that to the right column that's being invoked from my MySQL database, and that's all this data, being able to format stuff. So what I didn't really show, I'll show this real quick, is in my entities, stat, which is a list. This is kind of where the mapping of all the different synonyms for all the different stats kind of map to the actual value that I'm really interested in. This kind of will then map to kind of my database environment. So like I said, triples, triple, trips, trip, whatever, for triples, all that kind of stuff. And you keep adding them on and on. It's very nice.
Question, Dave.
Yes?
For the plural versus singular, do you have to add in the plural versions, like singles versus single?
I found that you have to, but then you could also do regex or there's patterns too that I haven't, that are fairly new to Lewis, but I haven't fully immersed myself in yet to really know when I need to, when I don't need to add the plurals. When I'm throwing this together pretty quickly, usually I just throw the singular and plural and just to make sure that it's getting captured. But I think like patterns and regex can help solve that.
And the back end to this is a SQL database that contains all the data?
No, this is all kind of contained within the Lewis service itself. So there's really no SQL database.
No, not so much the words, but the actual statistics.
Oh, like my baseball data?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll show that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, so all that stuff, I have a, I don't know if anyone's ever seen me present, but I love baseball stats. So I have like, there's this, Sean Layman is a baseball statistician. He publishes a baseball database every year that goes back to like the late 1800s of like every player, every team, boatloads of stats. So I mean, if you're a stats kind of guy, person, check out Sean Layman. It's a free, he publishes the database for free. There's a MySQL scripted version. There's an Access version, like Access, and then CSVs. So whatever format you're comfortable with, you can get the data in one of those three formats. Usually publishes it like at the beginning of the year. So I haven't updated this for 2017, but this is 2016. So I have an Azure MySQL database of all Sean Layman's data from 2016 all the way back to like the late 1800s. So that's where all my baseball stat data is located. I had that in a separate resource group, and I use that for some other applications. But then my bot itself, if I go back to my web app bot, I know I'm kind of moving fast. I want to show you the code. Oh, yeah, great. So what I did was, instead of kind of using the online code editor, I just downloaded the zip file and just used Visual Studio to kind of work with the code. So what I did was, you know what? I've been using Visual Studio Code for way too long. I was expecting possible. Sorry. So again, notice that the controller and the dialog are kind of set up similar to how QAMaker was, right? So the message controller, again, is just an API controller, and this is pretty much cookie cutter to what QAMaker did, except it's calling a basic Lewis dialog instead of a root dialog for QAMaker. Other than that, there's really nothing of interest in this API controller, although I can intercept along the way and all sorts of fun stuff. What I do in the Lewis dialog, though, this is a little more intricate than what I'm doing with QAMaker, which acts as anytime to anything. So I just have this Lewis dialog. I have kind of a private class in here to just for some housekeeping, just so I can kind of keep things a little neater. I use Dapper as my ORM, so I use a micro ORM called Dapper, and then just a MySQL client. If no one's ever used Dapper before, I'm able to put with that. No, fantastic micro ORM. Nothing against any framework, I have to say, except for Microsoft, but Dapper is freaking awesome. So if you need like Stack Overflow, the guys from Stack Overflow built Dapper based on. So anyway, so what I do, if you notice, there are I'm decorating my methods with the intent that I want to map my Lewis service to my code. So here's leader set. I got to return player set. So this isn't the cleanest code. So, here's my player stat Lewis intent, right? So I've mapped this Lewis intent from my Lewis service to this piece of code. So when the Web API controller gets the message that I've submitted and hands it off to Lewis, and Lewis says, oh, this looks like a player stat, and here are the entities that I found, and here are the values associated with those entities. It's going to package that all up and throw that into context here. And what was the result? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, it's in the result. So all the stuff that Lewis found in terms of the intent name, entities, all that kind of stuff, ends up in the result object. And then at that point, I just kind of go through it, pull out the pieces of information I'm interested in. I'm interested in, well, what stat are they going after? What's the name of the player? What's the year? I pull that stuff out. And then at that point, it's just plain old web, a web app at that point. I have my connection string in my app settings for my app service, so I'm going to have it in my code. Open up the connection, call the database, pull my data back out, format the message, and move on. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm not really doing any rocket science or anything along those lines. The craziest thing that I'm doing is create my Dapper query template strings down here. But again, that's all Dapper specific, MySQL specific kind of stuff. The bot framework stuff that's going on is figuring out, I'm going to call Lewis. I'm going to figure out what my intents are, or my intent is. I'm going to pass it to the right mapped function, and at that point, I'm going to let my code take over, call the database, get the results back, and then just post my results back to the client and wait for the next message. So again, it's pretty simple to start intercepting calls within the bot framework, calling out the custom databases, Azure search stores, who knows what, and pulling back your data and going crazy. So that's Lewis in a very small nutshell. Any questions on that? All right. So the last thing I wanted to touch on are channels. So what I have done is everything right now we've been testing just in web chat here within the Azure portal. You probably don't want users going to Azure to work with the bot, right? So you want to be able to expose it out to other users, other clients, all that kind of stuff. That's really where channels comes into play. So what I've done is I've created 4 different channels, and really there's kind of channels that are already pre-built for you down here. I've already selected them. But there's really nothing you have to do in order to write additional code to connect your channel to Cortana or Teams, or to have your own web chat control kind of out there. So if I look at, here's my baseball client here, right? Here's my just a plain old web page, right? It's fantastic HTML that I've created, and I've used this web chat client here. And there's a couple different ways you can call it, but for the most part, it kind of gives you the embed code right down here, like a YouTube video, right? Here's my secret keys that I have to apply to kind of link everything up together. Let's say how many numbers today? 3. Right? So you should give me back information here. 45 homers in 2003. Steroid free, right? Right. So the other thing I didn't show, and the baseball code is in GitHub, so you guys can take a look at it and see how I work with it. The one thing I didn't touch on is who had the most homers in 1950. So what you can also do is create things like cards in the bot framework. This is not a really specific thing. This is just using the bot framework. Instead of just presenting text back to the user, maybe I want to be able to have this is called a hero card. This big thing, and then each one of these are link cards inside of it. I could have images in here if I wanted to. I could screen screen a Ralph Kiner image or something like that. But I've made these hot links so that I click on Ralph Kiner, and I'm taking a baseball reference, right? So I can see all of everything about Ralph Kiner. But that's all in the GitHub repo, so you can definitely take a look at that and see how this is being created. But this is all being created through the leader stat intent. The player stat intent is gives you back plain old text. So you kind of see the difference between I want plain vanilla kind of response or something to go a bit fancier based on what you're trying. So that capability also comes with the bot framework. So I apologize for not really diving into that too much, but hopefully you can get the sense of how that works. So, but again, I can embed this within my web page. It's really just an iframe at that point. I could also take a different approach. So if I change that file around, so this is the file I have, I guess I should show. So these were the 2 iframes that I pulled from the web chat channel. So really all I'm doing is embedding an iframe, piece of cake. If I change this around and I use what's called direct line. So instead of just embedding an iframe, maybe I want to actually kind of call out to the bot framework and pull down the actual client. I don't want to have a key on the client or anything like that. I want to do this a little bit more dynamic. This is actually a non-React template. If I want to use that instead, ways to set up this going to take up the whole page. But again, the same kind of thing, right? It's the same chat interface by default. It's using the same CSS font and stuff. So you can embed these either way. There's a CSS file you can pull down. You can style it however you want. You can create your own because really it's just a REST call at that point also. And so you will get the same kind of result. Well, this word format. You should get a sense of what's going on. The other kind of neat thing with channels is that, like you with Cortana here, in order to have enable my baseball stats bot with Cortana, I'll really require. There it goes. So I haven't practiced this in front of anybody except for my wife, so it probably won't work. But the neat thing is that because I've created this bot using the Azure bot service and the bot framework under the hood, it's basically already ready to be connected to Cortana. All I have to do is essentially click connect to Cortana, and it's basically hooked up. So all you have to do is provide it what the display name is, like what Cortana is going to show you when it's trying to connect to it, and then what the invocation name is. So if I go to my Cortana app on my Android and I go, hey Cortana, ask baseball stats, who had the most homers in 2003? It's thinking, it's connecting me, so it shows me my top five. So honestly, I didn't have to write any code in order to connect into Cortana, but it's kind of a nice little way to start exposing my bot to a number of different channels. So whether it's Cortana or Skype, web chat, Teams, we create a handful of bots at Microsoft. So here's like my Teams environment. I create my little baseball bot just as a test. So it's the same kind of interface, right? So I'm asking it questions, it's going out to my MySQL database, pulling stuff back. Again, it's the same bot for my Teams interface. So it's pretty slick and easy to start getting things up and running pretty quickly.
But did you previously deploy that bot to Cortana?
All I did was I clicked on manage connect to Cortana.
And that quickly? This is the first time you've done it?
I did it last night.
Okay, so typically if I was designing something from scratch, and I just hit connect to Cortana, how long would it take until I can actually reach it through Cortana?
2, 3, 4 seconds. I was sitting on my couch watching America's Got Talent. and I think I related this show. My daughters were loving it, so I was ready for them. But yeah, I mean, so it's not like it's staged and it takes 3 hours to be available on Cortana. Honestly, it really was a matter of minutes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty slick, and to be able to get something up and running that quickly, it's pretty nice. I know I created an Alexa skill, and I wanted to have it hosted in Azure. This was like a year and a half ago, so it might be a lot different. I jumped through a lot of hoops in order to make that happen. To be able to have this work through Cortana, through an Android device.
But then let me play the devil's advocate. What if I was to deploy a similar bot that had baseball statistics, but I was completely wrong? And I said Barry Bonds hit only 1 home run in 2003. So now we got competing bots out there.
Okay.
So what would happen if you asked that question to Cortana?
Oh, you mean like our bots are named the same? Is that what you mean?
So when you ask that question to Cortana,
I said, hey Cortana, ask baseball stats. What question? How many homers did Barry Bonds hit?
okay, oh, so baseball stats was the name of the bot.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I see, okay,
Yeah, so here's my invocation name up here.
okay.
And it's so the invocation name is what Cortana is saying. Is the identifier, it's the trigger.
And does that have to be a unique name for Cortana? I would assume so, right?
Right now, it is, yes.
A question.
Oh, you know what? This is only tied to my ID right now. So once I publish it, I can publish it out to all of Cortana. I think I need to, for a few other groups. This is the ImKnowledge source.
Question.
Okay.
Cortana. Yes.
How do you know Cortana is drawing the right information and making a conclusion?
It's calling my bot service. So as long as my bot service is accurate, all Cortana is doing is making an HTTP request to the bot service. No different than the web chat client or a Teams client or something I've handled with .NET or Node or whatever it might be. As long as you make an HTTP request, you can invoke the bot.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty slick.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that's pretty much what I had. I went a little over on time, but are there any questions on this stuff? So Sam, I will send you the URL from my GitHub repo if you guys want to take a look at how that's built. It's pretty simple. It really doesn't diverge a lot from the template that's automatically created for Spot. Again, I like simple. But all I do is kind of put the database logic in there, maybe a few different routing things, and the card logic in terms of like structuring the cards the right way. Other than that, routing the message to the right intent is already done for me. I just spent time building the intents, and the others. It's fun stuff, and there's lots of other stuff with bots. Maybe we could talk about this for 8 hours, but I thought these two samples kind of give you at least a flavor of bot service and how you can start working with it, and probably go home and give it a shot and try out a knowledge base real quick, see what you think. And I'll also, I don't know if you have my email address or not, but I mean, feel free to reach out to me either on Twitter or email, and I'm more than happy to help out or answer questions. I like this stuff. This is great stuff. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Dave.
All right.
And I have to